Welcome to Appropriations 101. This is the first in a series where we are going through the appropriations process, the challenges it faces. We're going to be talking to all of the chairmen of the subcommittees, but today we have a special guest. That is the chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, a very good friend of mine, Tom Cole. He's, in fact, I believe he's the first Native American to ever chair the Appropriations Committee.
First Oklahoman, too.
Yeah, first Oklahoman, and he's been a good friend over the years, and he's what I call the ideal legislator, knows how to get things done. But he's new to the job of being Appropriations Committee chairman. We've had it now for, you've had it for
about 6 weeks.
Yeah, it seems like about 6 weeks. Huh? Seems like about 6 years.
Yeah.
But we face some obvious challenges, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's like being chairman of the Appropriations Committee, what your responsibilities are, and what are the challenges we face in the Appropriations Committee trying to get our bills done. As you know, and we've talked about this many times, we as appropriators want to get all our bills done, get them done on time before the next fiscal year starts. That hasn't happened since 1994. But we are still trying to get it done and get it through. So talk to us a little bit about that, what it's like being chairman of the committee.
Well, so number one, it's a great privilege, and it's a sign of confidence in your colleagues having you. But it's an enormous responsibility. I think the range of activity for the United States government spans everything from biomedical research to defending the country to building roads and highways to helping our less fortunate folks and providing aid to the state, disasters. It's just an enormous range. And I'm always, frankly, impressed with individual cardinals that master their subject area. But you know, when you're the chair, you're really the master of none. You're really the jack of all trades, and you're trying to coordinate the traffic and make sure these bills get done in a timely fashion. And it's, again, enormous amount of money, $1.6 trillion spread over the entire range of activity. And one of our great frustrations is they think we appropriate everything. We don't. We don't do Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those are the mandatory programs that are not controlled by the Appropriations Committee, and those are the things that drive the deficit. And that's probably problem number one. People think we actually spend more money on the Appropriations Committee than we do. And of course, you know, a lot of people feed into that narrative. Actually, if you look over the years, we've done a better job of controlling discretionary spending than we've done of controlling the expenses and the income for, you know, things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
You told me one time that we went for a 10-year period where the discretionary part of the budget, which is only 28% of the total funding, the other 72 is mandatory spending, but we went for 10 years.
We did. We went from fiscal year 2010 to fiscal year 2019. During that period, John Boehner, our mutual friend, was the speaker. He passed something called the Budget Control Act. We lived within that, and so in 2019 we were spending less on defense than we were in 2010, and we're spending less on non-defense. So our total budget went down. In that same period of time, mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid for the most part, went from 1.9 trillion to 3.2 trillion. So while we lowered the deficit pretty rapidly, at the beginning of that period it was over $1 trillion a year coming right out of the financial crisis. We got it down to under 500 billion, but then the baby boomer generation kicked into higher retirement gear, and boom, all these other expenses moved back up, and they're beyond the control of our committee. But you know, again, a lot of the most important functions, particularly defending the country, where we spend about half of what we spend, a little bit over, on that single function alone, making sure that our borders, or frankly, that the country is secure from foreign attack.
So what's your goal this year in being chairman of the committee and how the committee works and getting our job done?
Well, first you have to remember I came in at midstream. We're halfway through the fiscal year, and we had not gotten our appropriations budgets done at that point. They were out of committee, but they were not across the floor. And we were able to get that done. We got great leadership from Kay Granger, you know, my predecessor, and great leadership from Speaker Mike Johnson. So in March, we passed all of the appropriations bills in two large mini buses, as they're called. Since then, we've tried to catch up because we're 6 months behind. So the goal, number one, is to get all the bills written by the subcommittees and then through the full committee by the August break. That's a very intense schedule. We'll also begin to move them across the floor. This week, we'll move the first one, Military Construction and Veterans Administration, if all goes well. That's probably as important a bill as we do, keeping the faith and trust with our veterans who served us well and who we made commitments to. But then we've got a very narrow margin, and so unless we get basically every Republican vote, Democrats are not going to help us move these bills at this point, and I understand why. They have control of the Senate, they have control of the White House, so they're going to wait until that negotiation before they free up any votes. So it's going to be a tall order to get all these bills across the floor. We'll get several of them and get them out of committee and get in a position where we can sit down and negotiate with our counterparts in the Senate and on the other side of the aisle.
Well, and that's another aspect of being chairman of the full committee. Not only do you have to get the bills across the floor, and a lot of scheduling that is in the majority leaders and speakers arena. All we can do is mark them up in full committee and wait for them to let us bring them to the floor. Yeah. But once we pass them, then the big job of negotiating those bills out with the Senate, a lot of that responsibility is yours. The Cardinals and the subcommittees will do their job, but there will be things that we can't get done, which, as they say, kick it upstairs. That's up to you to sit and negotiate a lot of those things.
You never send the easy problems
no.
up there.
If it was easy, we would have done it already.
I was going to say, having done this to other chairmen, I'm prepared to take my turn in the barrel. But that's true. We're very lucky, though. I mean, honestly, the four people will do the bulk of that negotiation, and then the very last stuff goes to the speaker, the majority leader, and their respective leadership teams for the final touches. But the reality is there's a lot of dialogue between these different levels all the way through the process. But we have very skilled counterparts. Rosa DeLaura, who's the Democratic ranking member, is a good friend of mine. We worked together for 8 years on labor age bills, got them across the line, usually where we could vote the same way almost every time on final passage. And then Patty Murray was part of that group of four. She was the Senate Democratic counterpart. She's now chair of the full committee. Susan Collins, who's I think one of the best legislators in Congress, period, is the Republican counterpart. So we've got four appropriators. They all want to get the job done. They want to get the bills passed. They don't want to either have a government shutdown or what's called a continuing resolution, where we just leave things as they are, whether it makes sense or not. They want to get to a negotiated deal. So I think we have a good chance of doing that, probably not by the end of the fiscal year, but if I had my way, by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah. One of the other things I'd mention and have you talk about is this committee I have found to be one of the most bipartisan committees in all of Congress. While if you sat and listened to our debates, it sounds sometimes like we are at each other's throat. We're really not. That we don't ignore what the Democrat minority thinks on some bills, but these bills that we're writing are obviously going to be in Republicans' favor. When they're in the majority, they're going to be in Democratic favor, and they don't ignore what our priorities are entirely. So we try to work together, both at the subcommittee level, trying to address the concerns that everybody has, and at the full committee level. While there be some amendments that offered that will create some somewhat partisan debate, that's natural and that's to be expected. But this is, I think, one of the most nonpartisan committees in trying to get our jobs done.
It is. Well, and it has to get its job done one way or the other every year.
Yeah.
Other committees, important committees, Ways and Means, doesn't have to do anything in a particular year. It can do taxes or not do taxes. It can do entitlement reform. It cannot do. Same thing with energy and commerce. This committee has to produce and pass 12 separate bills out of committee and hopefully across the floor.
Yeah.
But if not, they're sometimes grouped in more convenient packages called mini buses, or occasionally, and we hate this, an omnibus, one big awful bill. But the reality is, if we don't get our job done every year, the government shuts down. That means the military doesn't get paid. That means that our border patrol isn't taken care of. It's a disaster. So one way or the other, we have to produce product, and that calls for compromise.
Yeah, it does. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about the Appropriations Committee and your job as chairman of it, and wish you the best of luck. It's a job that I don't know if I'd want to take on, because Tom spends more time working on this committee and the other committees that he has served on in the past than any member I've ever seen. And he does a fantastic job. As I said, he's one of the people, if I listed probably in the years I've been here, the 5 or 10 legislators that I think are people that we ought to emulate. Tom Cole would be one of them.
Well,
So thank you,
let
Tom.
me just quickly return the compliment. I learned how to do this job working for you. You were first the ranking member and then the full chairman of the Interior, where you're back again, and I'm glad you're there. I've never seen anybody work that bill better, but the reality was, everything I learned about being a chairman, I learned from you, and I mean that quite sincerely. I think you're just one of the very best legislators in Congress. That's not just me. Our Democratic colleagues would tell you the same thing. You've always been able to establish a rapport, get the job done, and it didn't matter what you were given, you managed to make lemonade out of lemons every time.
Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that very much. And thank you for tuning in to this first edition of Appropriations 101. Tune into the future editions when we will have the cardinals, as they're called, or the chairman of the subcommittees, to discuss their bill and what are the challenges that they're facing in their bill and what it exactly funds. So thank you very much.